You're listening to a production of the National Media Archive. To learn more or volunteer, go to nationalmediaarchive.com.
Picture this. Wall Street in the 1980s and 90s wasn't just about numbers and stocks. It was a playground for the ambitious, a jungle where greed wasn't just tolerated, it was the oxygen everyone breathed. Now, when I say excess, I'm talking about something almost mythic. Luxury cars, designer drugs like cocaine and quaaludes, wild parties, and, yes, sex-fueled escapades straight out of a movie. But here's a question. What happens when ambition crosses the line into vice? This was an era ruled by one law: make money. And if you spent it just as fast, well, all the better. The technical term here is market deregulation, meaning fewer rules and more room for risky behavior. Now you might be thinking, is this just Hollywood hype? Let me tell you, if anything, the reality was even crazier. And no one personifies this better than Jordan Belfort, the self-proclaimed Wolf of Wall Street. Before you roll your eyes and think, here comes another movie retelling, stick with me. The real story behind the Wolf of Wall Street is far more layered than what you've seen on screen. Let's rewind. Jordan Belfort was born in Queens, New York. Even as a kid, he was always selling his first business, was hawking Italian ices with his childhood friend, turning a couple of styrofoam coolers into 20-0 in sales. You've got to wonder, was it the product or just raw selling power? In sales, we call this conversion rate, the percentage of people you persuade to buy. For Belfort, that number was always sky high. He dreamed of becoming a dentist, enrolling in the University of Maryland School of Dentistry. But on the very first day, the dean told him, dentistry isn't for people who want to get rich. That was all Belfort needed to hear. So he pivoted next stop door-to-door meat sales. He claimed to sell 50 pounds of meat in a single week. Sounds impressive, right? But the business collapsed, and by 25, he was bankrupt. Now, you might ask, how does someone bounce back from that? Belfort did it the only way he knew, by finding a new hustle, this time on Wall Street. Belfort's entry into the financial world started with a job as a stockbroker at a major firm. Here, he discovered what some call the art of the pitch, convincing people to invest, often with nothing but charm and a phone. He quickly learned about commissions brokers cut of each sale in cold calling, which is basically dialing strangers and selling them dreams. Picture a room buzzing with aggressive voices, each fighting for the next big score. But he didn't just want to work for someone else. Soon, he acquired an investment firm called Stratton Oakmont, recruiting childhood friends and even his father. It was a team built on loyalty and shared hunger for wealth. Now, some of you might be thinking, isn't this just good entrepreneurship? At first, maybe, but the lines between legal and illegal get blurry fast when ambition's the only compass. This is the setup for what would become one of the most infamous stories in Wall Street history. Stratton Oakmont wasn't your average investment firm. It became a magnet for young, undereducated men and women desperate for a shot at the big time. Belfort called them the Strattonites. Here's where two important concepts come into play: boiler room and sales script. A boiler room is a high-pressure environment packed with aggressive salespeople who use carefully crafted scripts to manipulate investors. The conflict? Most of these recruits lacked experience, but that made them easy to mold. Belfort trained them to be relentless, to never take no for an answer, and to push stocks with total conviction, even when they were worthless. Now, imagine the energy. Phones ringing, voices shouting, money flowing in. But beneath the surface, a culture of greed and vice flourished. Drugs, parties, and wild behavior became business as usual. You might be wondering, didn't anyone notice? The truth is, Wall Street thrives on appearances, and as long as the money kept rolling in, few asked questions. Let's talk about Stratton Oakmont's signature scam, the pump and dump. Sounds like gym slang, right? But in finance, it's a classic fraud. Here's how it works. First, they'd pump up a stock's price by spreading rumors and aggressive sales tactics. Think of it as inflating a balloon with hot air, lots of excitement, little substance. Next comes the dump. Once prices soared, insiders would offload their shares, making a fortune as the price crashed back down, leaving regular investors holding worthless stock. It's market manipulation, pure and simple. You may ask, weren't there any safeguards? Well, regulatory bodies like the SEC existed, but boiler room operations often stayed one step ahead, exploiting loopholes and moving fast. This was the dark magic behind Stratton Oakmont's millions. But as with any bubble, it couldn't last forever. One of Belfort's biggest coups was taking Steve Madden's shoe company public. Now, an IPO initial public offering means selling shares of a private company to the public for the first time. Here's where market manipulation and insider trading come into play. Belfort's crew bought up shares at 5, then hyped the stock to 20 using their boiler room tactics before dumping it for a $20 million windfall in just 3 minutes. It sounds almost cartoonish, but these tactics worked because Stratton Oakmont controlled both the supply and the hype. Their sales force trained like soldiers executed orders with precision. But this victory planted the seeds of their downfall. The operation became too large, the lifestyle too extreme. The bigger the spectacle, the harder it was to hide. So, what happens when you fly too close to the sun? The cracks start to show, and the hunters become the hunted. Let's pull back the curtain. Belfort's lavish lifestyle spiraled into chaos. 700, 0 hotel bills, reckless helicopter rides, even sinking his own yacht. The technical term here? Addiction-fueled impairment when substance abuse affects judgment. And it wasn't just him. Daniel Perouche, his right-hand man, took excess to new extremes, smuggling drugs internationally, swallowing a goldfish as punishment for underperformance. Wild, right? This conflict, the growing recklessness, brought the FBI and financial regulators sniffing around. You might wonder, didn't anyone try to intervene? The truth is, the house of cards was already teetering. As paranoia set in, Belfort's drug use skyrocketed. He became suspicious of friends and colleagues, especially after his Swiss banker was detained for money laundering. And yet, even as the pressure mounted, the party raged on until the authorities finally closed in. Regulatory bodies like the SEC and NASD had been after Stratton Oakmont since the late 80s. Their goal? To put an end to fraudulent schemes and protect investors from predatory practices. Eventually, the conflict reached a head. Belfort was forced to sell his shares and his partner Perouche took over. But without Belfort's leadership, or maybe because of it, the firm imploded. In 1996, the NASD expelled Stratton Oakmont, effectively shutting it down. The president of NASD regulation even celebrated, declaring the industry rid of one of its worst actors. But for Belfort, losing the firm was just the beginning. The FBI was now investigating him for money laundering and securities fraud, a whole new level of legal peril. So, how do you go from being the king of Wall Street to public enemy number 1? Sometimes, it's just a matter of time and hubris. Facing decades behind bars, Belfort made a choice: cooperate with authorities. In legal terms, this is called plea bargaining, testifying against former colleagues to get a reduced sentence. He was sentenced to 22 months in prison and ordered to pay $110 million in restitution. But here's a twist: despite making millions from books and speaking gigs, reports say he's only repaid about $11.6 million so far. You might ask, is that justice? Legally, maybe, but ethically, questions linger. Many of his victims lost life savings, and Belfort's own remorse has often seemed calculated. After prison, he reinvented himself as a motivational speaker, preaching about bouncing back from failure. But is redemption possible without full accountability? It's a dilemma. How much can we forgive? And what does real restitution look like? Now, here's where things get blurry. The Wolf of Wall Street book and movie made Belfort a legend, but how much is true? Even his former partner Daniel Perouche called the book a distant relative of the truth, and the movie even further removed. Let's break it down. Despite what you've seen on screen, there was no chimpanzee in the office, no sex-free work memo, and, ironically, no one actually called Belfort the Wolf of Wall Street during his heyday. But some wild stories like Perouche swallowing a goldfish are 100% real. Still, the technical term here is unreliable narrator. When someone's memory is clouded by years of drug abuse, how much can we trust their version? Now, you might be thinking, does it matter if the story isn't fully true? Maybe. The real danger is in glamorizing criminality, making heroes out of hustlers. So, as we unpack the legend, remember, separating fact from fiction is itself a kind of forensic investigation. Today, Jordan Belfort tours the world as a business guru, claiming he's a changed man. but critics like former FBI agent Greg Colmenaret convinced. They call him a work in progress, noting that many victims are still waiting for restitution. There's a key concept here: restorative justice, the idea that true redemption comes from making victims whole, not just saying sorry on stage. Belfort claims he's paid his dues, but government reports suggest otherwise. For example, in 2011, he earned nearly $1 million from his story, yet paid only a fraction back to those hurt by his crimes. Now, let's ask the tough question: should a con man get to profit from his crimes, even if he preaches self-improvement? Or is his new persona just another hustle? Ultimately, the Wolf of Wall Street story forces us to examine our own values. Do we celebrate the comeback or demand true accountability? The choice, as always, is ours.